Welcome back once again to a Project Cars segment. So, as you guys have been watching on that 1987 325 IS that I just bought back, it's got a 95 S50B30 in it, and it doesn't quite run right, even though it's running a lot better these days. So I decided I'm going to freshen up an M20 and put an M20 back in this car. I know it seems a little bit sacrilegious at this point to kind of revert from the far superior 24-valve engine back to a 12-valve, but the fact of the matter is I have a nice M20, and that S50 just doesn't run quite right, so it's not worth it to me to try and save it, at least in that chassis. I think I'll pull the S50 out, maybe rebuild it again, and then put it in Brexit, and then sell Brexit's Turbo S52 hardware. I think that might be smarter. So anyway, this is a time-lapse teardown of the M20 B25 that I pulled out of that 1990 525i 5-speed. Sorry if you hear the cat meows, she's needy. I don't really know the history on this particular engine. I really feel like it was replaced from the time that my late friend owned the 5 Series to the time that I bought it. The balancer on the front, that trigger wheel, said 1989 325i, and the cylinder head actually has a 1987 casting on it, so I'm not exactly sure the history on it, but this is just a time-lapse of me pulling it apart. It looked pretty good on the outside, obviously pretty leaky because it's an M20. It does have the later timing gear on it, which leads me to believe that it probably is actually a late model engine, but accessories themselves, pretty clean. Pan's obviously disgusting, and I really had to fight this thermostat housing. On a lot of these cylinder heads, the dissimilar metals mixed with coolant really starts to oxidize, corrode, and sometimes it's bad enough for the stud actually snaps off in the cylinder head, where you need an extractor. Luckily, I was able to get it off without that, with the help of my bench vise, but as you can see, it put up quite the fight. Timing belt looked like it had a lot of miles, but it wasn't necessarily that old. All the writing was gone, but it wasn't cracked. Blue valve cover, just nastiness, but pulling it off just to see what the cylinder head bolts looked like. If they are the E-Torx style, it means the head's been redone. They are indeed. Most of the rocker arms actually looked really good. There were two that looked original. They still had a lot of varnishing on them. Once I got the head all apart, I noticed that there was evidence that this thing maybe had not had the best oil pressure, so the bottom end might not have been perfect. But the exhaust actually came off pretty easy. I think I got all but one of the exhaust nuts and studs out, but you can see I had to get the grinder up for that last one. So that's pretty uncommon. Most of the time I end up fighting the vast majority of those out. Really nice single mass flywheel and clutch set. Again, that looked like it might have even been original to the car and the engine. It had a lot of miles on it, but no hot spots or anything, which is pretty impressive. There's me bagging the cylinder head bolt washers, because the washers are very expensive. And yeah, that's where I'm discovering the pretty bad scoring and ridging on the number 3 cylinder and the number 5 cylinder. Everything else looked pretty okay, and I don't really understand because the spark plugs read pretty okay. So guys, I'm going to give you a quick project update because although I live streamed it on Twitch, I didn't actually publish any video on tearing this 2.5 liter down. Unfortunately, the news isn't great. The head's actually really nice. It's definitely been worked over at some point. Just has 2 dirty rockers, which is kind of strange, but everything looks really good. The block, though, even though this thing started up, ran, really well, didn't smoke or anything, the bores on number 3 and number 5 are really not great. Lots of corrosion, some fairly deep scoring. I think there's enough hatching there where it probably would be okay, and it's definitely rebuildable, but I decided to look for another motor. So, I actually went out to the shop that I used to run, which is just about 20 miles from me here now, and I found an engine that I pulled myself about 5 years ago, and this is out of, as you can tell, an automatic 1988 528E. what's fancy about the 1988 is they ran out of pretty much all of the old 2.7 liter stuff, mainly electronics and computers, so they made what was called a SuperETA, which is essentially the same displacement as an ETA, but it had a much higher static compression ratio, similar to the 325i. So what you can do to these is put the I head with the dual valve springs. It's the same casting, actually. It's a 1701885. Same valves and everything, but the cam is different and the valve springs are different because these are only designed to rev to 5,500 RPM, and the 325i is good for 6,500. So anyway, I digress. It's an auto, so I know it hasn't been over-revved. It did run 5-6 years ago. I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to pull the plugs out and scope them, and we'll see what we can see. I'm optimistic, but these make really good power NA. You just run a standard 325i computer and harness, run some 19-pound Ford Mustang Fox body fuel injectors, and it's just stock. Runs really, really nice. They make about 180 horsepower to the tire, and it should be a great upgrade for that little 325 IS. From stock anyway, granted it will be significantly less power than an S50. I just don't much care. It even has an AC compressor on it, which is kind of cool. Well, I scoped them, PB blasted them, and it's perfect. It wasn't even, it didn't even have a little bit of a step when you actually get on the wrench. So I think everything is pretty good on this engine. Oh, of course. As I tried to show you, I put it down on the flex plate. But I mean, this is... pretty good. So I'm very excited about that. Not going to pull the head on it today, but soon. I've got everything ordered that I can think of anyway. And I think I even have a new oil pan at home, so should be pretty good. I'm excited. The mix of voiceover. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, the spark plugs, pulled them out, everything looked good, didn't smoke, good compression on the 2.5, but I just wasn't willing to risk it. So this SuperETA, as you can see here, it's got a brand new oil pan for an E30 on it, which I just had sitting around in my parts room. But I took pretty much everything off of it, front and back, did rear main seal, did front crank seal, did an oil pump seal, obviously new pan gasket and pan, degreased and cleaned the block like crazy. I actually took some green Scotch-Brite and lightly did a few of the bores just because there was some flash rust on them. But for the most part, the block looked really good. So the plan is to essentially just freshen it up, reseal it, put as much new stuff as I can on it. I'm actually going to throw an aftermarket oil cooler on it instead of the factory unit. You can see an FJ Cruiser oil filter on it right here. I threw that on basically just... so I could get it painted. And sorry, I'm saying that these clips are now out of order. So you saw the the post clip before the actual teardown, but either way, you get to see the actual process of tearing these things down. This was a fully dressed engine. These are a Motronic 1.1, so very similar to the early 325i, but higher compression 2.7 bottom end than the ETA. They're just a really great fit for a fun NA car if you don't want to spend $1,000 on the 2.9 liter IE stroker. So that's essentially it. This engine had a nice Reman alternator on it, which was cool. It had a Vickers power steering pump on it, which is desirable and actually kind of hard to find. The Seiko, I think, AC compressor spun fine. It looks like it's going to be okay. I did clean that up too. Most of the parts off of this went in the ultrasonic tank. Anything that was supposed to be black got pore 15'd. The block itself got pore 15'd. And the cylinder heads both actually came apart, and it's going to be an amalgamation of the two. The SuperETA shares the same cylinder head casting, so it's a 1701885, but it runs a 4-journal camshaft and single valve springs, just because it's not intended to rev. So I ended up pulling a couple valves out of that, and I may actually end up using that casting, but... I found a little bit of scoring, not bad, but a little bit of scoring on the 2.5 liter. So the first engine I took apart, its camshaft and cam bearings, and the rocker arms were a little bit flattened on the fingers. So I'm just going to take the best of both heads, put them together, and throw it on here. I do have a set of metric blue head bolts, which are kind of an old school turbo trick. Those are going to go on here because I have them, and they're great bolts. They obviously can be reused a couple times because they're nice stuff. But yeah, standard alternator, standard power steering pump. I'm hoping the power steering pressure hose that actually came off of this E28 engine is compatible with the E30 rack, because that's one of the more expensive parts I'd have to buy new. All late model, probably 89 325i cooling system stuff. It's just a little bit easier to deal with than the system that was originally in the 87 IS. It's also compatible with the Z3M radiator that I already have in the car, which will be a really nice time saver. 325i intake manifold, 325i harness. I'm actually going to end up running an 89 harness as well, because the oxygen sensor wiring is a little bit different, and it matches the exhaust front section that I got, as well as the only harness I have with an uncut C101 in my parts room is from an 89. So should be pretty good. I mean, if you look under the hood, you're going to know it's not an 87 engine, but at this point, I'm not really sure I care, as long as it's all OE stuff and it's at least a correct enough engine. So yeah, there's a lot to do. The thermostat housing, one of them, I think it was the one off of this, you could see it came off way easier, nice and clean, not badly corroded, so I should be able to reuse that. The head had never been off of the SuperETA. It still had the original hex-style head bolts, which are actually kind of notoriously failure-prone. But the head looked good. The valves sealed just fine. Like I said, the bores looked really good, too. There was a little bit of flash rust just from sitting in a non-climate-controlled warehouse for 5 years. But all things considered, it's in better shape than I really thought it was going to be. Just really grimy. The seals all needed to be replaced. And, of course, it had a stamped steel oil pan on it, which I believe I'll be pulling off here pretty soon for you. That does not fit in the E30. So the E34 pan is the same as the E30 pan, but the E28 ran something completely different. The oil pump drive actually comes off the front there just above the main crank gear. And you can use, it's a regular right hand, I guess, thread bolt, so lefty-loosey. You can just pull that off along with the crank bolt. If you have a powerful electric impact, you can get both of those off, and then there's just a few 10 mils, and you can replace both the front seals pretty easily. The process I learned on that was you really have to be careful, because you have to step both seals over the front, basically the seating surfaces, without blowing the spring out of the back of the seal, which is fairly easy to do. So I found a hook pick, just being really careful to not actually tear the seal, was good enough, and then maintaining that paper gasket behind the back of it. The pan gaskets on the M20s are also all, they're cork. They're not like a modern rubber butyl, whatever, like an M50 or an N50 or something like that. So that was a little bit of a letdown, because cork just really, in my opinion, is not up to the long-haul task of sealing an engine, and I'm surprised an aftermarket hasn't gone through and actually made an updated design for one of those. Yeah, you can see the more or less bare block here. It still has the front cover on it. I'll be pulling that right now. See, I took the front, I don't even know what you call that. I guess the hub off the crankshaft. I just pulled the oil pump drive. There you see the bare front of the block. Just cleaning everything up as best I can. A lot of degreaser went into this. But everything looked really good. It spun nice. Razor blade, getting the old paper gasket remnants off, residue. And pretty much every small part that could come off and fit in the ultrasonic cleaner, I took off and put in the ultrasonic cleaner. So, oil pump looked good. The E28 actually kind of shares the IX design, where the dipstick goes into the block. I don't believe the regular E30 did that. I thought it went into the pan, but I know one of them is like that and the other one isn't, so maybe I'm thinking about the other way around, where the IX goes into the pan and the regular E30 goes into the block. Either way, the E28 dipstick looks like it lines up perfectly, and it fits great into that brand new pan I've got for the E30, so I don't foresee any issues with that, and it's been going together really, really well. Not on video yet. I was able to tape off the freeze plugs and all the other mating surfaces, and gave the engine block a nice coat of Por 15. Like I said, I did all the seals on it. So it turns out my spring compressor was actually down here the whole time. So I quickly ripped one of the, looks like exhaust valves out, and this head looks pretty good. There's a little bit of scoring in the cam bearing journals, but not much. Certainly not anything I'm worried about. So I probably will end up going with this head. There was one valve right here that looks like it got beat up pretty good. So I'm going to replace that one. I guess that one. There are two exhaust valves I'm going to replace just because they look a little bit beat up. But everything else looks pretty okay. And then, of course, I'm going to pull them all apart and replace this little stem seal. I, of course, ruined this one getting it out, but I have new ones. And that's just what keeps the oil from, the cylinder head into or out of the combustion chamber. In this case, an exhaust one, it would just blow it straight into the exhaust, and an intake one, it would get sucked in, especially under vacuum, into the combustion chamber, creating a lot of smoke. So that's the plan. I'll probably end up doing these one by one. It's just easier to keep the keeper and, of course, the dual valve springs all separate and everything, but the valves look pretty good. Looks like they sealed pretty well. We did pour some lacquer thinner in the ports, and a couple of them had just a little bit of a dribble, but it was pretty good. Not to the point where I think I would buy lapping compound and start lapping the valves, but I could. This isn't a full rebuild, it's mainly a refresh, so I think it'll end up being pretty darn nice. It's looking really good. seal looks like pretty good. I just used an 11mm 3/8 socket and a hammer to gently tap that on there. These did come with these little guys, which you slip over the end of the intake valve as you slip it up through here. I'm probably not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to keep an eye on it, make sure I don't tear the seal or anything. But seeing as the spring that actually holds its shape is on the outside, I'm really not too worried about it when inserting the valve. Again, just be gentle, careful, and there you go. Easy peasy. Throw the dual valve springs back on. You know, it's a nice stem seal because the valve hasn't dropped back out of the head yet. But yeah, I'll throw it back in there and you can kind of see what it looks like. It's a really easy process. One of these tools, I highly recommend it. This is an overhead cam valve spring compressor. It was like $60 way back in the day. Paid for itself many times. So there we go. Nice and freshened up. Like I said, I'm just going to do that process for everything, replacing the stem seal, and then I'm going to swap out 2 exhaust valves just because the actual valve stem got hit pretty good from lack of valve adjustment. So you definitely want to avoid that. This is why you do valve adjustment. It's not optional. But yeah, that's all there is to it, and this is only a 12 valve head, so it really won't take long at all. Unfortunately, I'm off for tonight, but I'll finish it up, and then it'll be time to throw it on that block. And here are just a few photos to tide you over until I can get the head on this thing and do some more video on it. But it's looking pretty good. I mean, certainly not rebuilt or anything, but it'll look pretty fresh under the hood, so that's kind of what I'm after.